Hello, and welcome to another probably ridiculously long and unnecessarily convoluted recap of the Throne of Glass series. The series where an awkward introvert with questionable communication skills tries to recap the entirety of the Throne of Glass series. Right now, this marks the second video in our series so far. We did previously start with The Assassin's Blade, which was a series of prequel novellas that were actually written after the first Throne of Glass book, which is the one that we're reading today. So when it comes to the order of things, there's so many different ways of reading so far. I've decided to go chronologically because I'm going through the series as I read through the books. That being said, just the way that the series is set up, with Throne of Glass, there will be spoilers for The Assassin's Blade. So if you haven't read The Assassin's Blade yet, or if you wanted to read that first, I would recommend you check that out first, or check out the video first before heading on to this one, just in case you want to avoid spoilers, because there will be some references here and there that are made. And obviously there will be spoilers for the entirety of the Throne of Glass book. There aren't any spoilers going forward. I haven't actually gotten that far in the series yet, so I don't think I can spoil anything. But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time in the intro, so let's get to it. We open in the salt mines of Endovier, where Celaena Sardothien is being dragged through this building in shackles at sword point and guarded by at least half a dozen guards. A little excessive? Well, maybe not, considering that the 18-year-old blonde is considered to be the most famous and notorious assassin in all of Adarlan. As a result of her capture a year ago, she's been sentenced to work in the salt mines of Endovier, where the life expectancy is said to be about 3 months long. So Celaena's not feeling so great about this. She does have a feeling that she is heading off into her execution. She doesn't really know what's going on right now. They're leading her through this building, and she can tell pretty quickly that they're like zigzagging her through floors, and they're like trying to go up and down stairs and just trying to like confuse and disorient and intimidate her. But obviously she is a big bad assassin, and she wasn't gonna let that work. So she uses this opportunity to familiarize herself with the building. So she overhears that the man that is dragging her around is the captain of the guard, Chaol Westfall. Yes, that is Chaol. Full disclosure, for the first time I read this, I pronounced it Chol in my mind for at least 75% of the book. I have nothing to say. Maybe Chaol, maybe Cole, maybe Chol. Eventually, Celaena's led to this massive, ornate, super pristine and clean throne room, and she's brought before the Crown Prince of Adarlan, basically all of the land, Dorian Havilyard. Now, Dorian Havilyard is essentially the quintessential Prince Charming. He is said to be gorgeous, with sapphire eyes and wavy brown hair, and just like enough charm to drown someone. I don't know. He's described to be achingly handsome, and Celaena mentions that it's not fair for someone to be this powerful and this attractive. There has to be like some cutoff or some trade-off here, like the Prince Charles of Spain. I mean, that makes sense. But anyways, upon their entry, Chaol takes off his hooded cloak and he bows to the prince. He's described to be moderately handsome, actually. He's younger looking, he has golden eyes and brown hair, I believe. Celaena's expected to bow, but she refuses, and as a result, the mustachioed, blonde Duke Parrington decides to just like fully slam her into the ground and force her to bow. Dorian, all aboard charm, argues that undermines the entire purpose of bowing, which is to profess your allegiance and respect, and he promptly dismisses Duke Parrington. Celaena can't help but feel kind of dirty. She was said to have been very beautiful at one point, but after a year in the salt mines, she's not looking so hot. She's half starved. She's almost been worked to death. She's covered in grime, and her body's basically been decimated after this camp. She should by no chance be alive right now, really. Dorian's kind of inspecting her, and he's asking her all these questions. Eventually, it is brought up that Celaena did try to escape a couple years ago. It is brought up that Celaena did try to escape about 4 months into her stay, where she says she just kind of snapped. She ended up killing 23 sentries, and she made it about 363 feet before being, like, knocked out. Just to put it in perspective, the average distance a person can make while they're escaping is about 3 feet. So this was quite an impressive feat. She's actually pretty proud of this. But Dorian calls out the fact that she didn't really intend to make it out alive, and she doesn't argue this. A reason why she did end up making it that far is because when she was imprisoned, the king had strict orders for her, and that was that she was supposed to be kept alive for as long as possible. He didn't want to make her time there easy, so he wanted her to suffer. So Celaena quickly pieces together that they're trying to kind of like gauge her sanity, and she can tell that they want something from her. So finally, the prince says that he has a proposition for her. So it turns out that the king of Adarlan is seeking a champion, someone who will keep his enemies at bay and who will like silently work for him. Essentially, he wants a personal assassin. In order to find his champion, he's putting together a competition where 23 of his councilmen will be putting forward some candidates in order to fight for the honor of being the king's champion. Candidates will train and they will perform tests at the castle, and the last one standing essentially is the one who's to be chosen. So it's the Hunger Games, but with criminals, basically. The winner is said to be the king's sword for about 6 years before receiving their freedom. He's been scouring the land for her for the past 2 weeks because he wants her to be his champion. Only she won't be competing for herself. So it turns out that the king of Adarlan wasn't too pleased to find out that the most notorious assassin who was terrorizing the entire land was a 17-year-old girl. So as a result, Celaena's identity was never really revealed. Nobody knows what she looks like. And when she's competing, she wouldn't be going under Celaena Sardathian. She would be going under another alias because the king didn't want to lose face. Celaena never thought that she would make it out of the mines, nevertheless experienced freedom. She says that she will agree to be his champion if he manages to bring the sentence down to 4 years instead of 6 years. And after some back and forth, he agrees. And off to Rifthold they go. Now for a little background. We're going to turn to our little handy dandy map over here so we can see the country of Adarlan. So Adarlan is a rapidly expanding empire. I believe it started off just being this section, but it's been growing off, and I think it's into Fenhero right now. It's into Melisson. I think Terrasen's also taken over. So rapidly expanding. Right now, they are currently in the salt mines of Endovier, which are located right around here. So in order to get to Rifthold, they're going to travel from Endovier. They're going to go through Oakwalled Forest until they eventually make it to the capital city of Rifthold, where the glass castle is. Now, Oakwalled Forest is considered to be this beautiful forest. I think it has opal, sapphire, and these pretty beautiful leaves, and it once used to be a magical forest. However, everything changed when Adarlan attacked, and the magic fled the land. So essentially, in the process of Adarlan expanding, they ended up rounding up all the magical creatures and all the magic in the land, and all the magic was banished. It kind of disappeared. We don't get too much information about this, but so far as we know, magic left 8 years ago. However, this was a deeply magical forest where the Fae used to reside, and as they're venturing through it, you can tell that some of the soldiers and part of the company are pretty uneasy about this whole forest. They're relieved because they said they're going to be burning the forest down soon, but Celaena kind of warns them to have respect for the magic, and there still might be magic dwelling in the depths of the forest. Anyway, so they are camping out in this forest one night when Celaena wakes up and she finds these little footprints and then these flowers at the base of her bed. She immediately freaks out. She brushes away the footmarks and then she hides all the flowers away. So we kind of get the sense that there is still some magic here at play. Through their whole journey, Celaena is trying to get under Chaol's skin. But he's pretty stern and he doesn't really give her much to go off of. Chaol is incredibly loyal to the king, and he sees the world as being black and white. His morals are incredibly important to him and incredibly strong. I almost wanted to use Cyril from Andor for his character. If you know, you know. But I digress. Eventually they make it to the outskirts of Rifthold. They're over a cliff and they can see the castle and the Rifthold in the distance, and they decide to camp out there for the night before heading into the city the next day. That night, Celaena has a nightmare, so she wakes up and then she goes kind of to overlook the city, and the Glass Castle. So Rifthold used to be kind of like Celaena's city. This is where she spent a lot of her life in. This is where she gained her reputation as an assassin. This is where she lived with Arobynn, the king of the assassins. It's kind of strange seeing the city once again. The last time she saw the city was when she was right before she was captured and carted away to Endovier. So she still doesn't know who it was that betrayed her. She suspects it's another assassin. She also has a suspicion at the back of her mind of who it might be, but she's kind of like, she's not ready to face that yet. And we get this really pretty scene where she's like over the cliff, overlooking the city, and she's kind of bathed in moonlight, and she decides that she is kind of done with wanting to like rule Rifthold and have this whole reputation. She doesn't want to reign over a city anymore. When it comes down to it, she just wants her freedom. She says, magic was dead, the Fae were banished or executed, and she would never again have anything to do with the rise and fall of kingdoms. Dorian also is watching her from afar, and he sees a lovely girl gazing at the stars and the stars who gazed back. The next day, Celaena returns to Rifthold, and she is a part of Prince Dorian's entourage, so it's like a whole festivity. I'm picturing Helen of Troy when she comes back and she arrives in the place where she goes to. Anyways, she's kind of eating it up. She's like waving to the peasants. She's like winking at little boys too. She's like eating up all the attention until they make it to near the docks where she sees all the slaves working on the docks, and she immediately feels like ashamed. She just wants to like tell them that she's not a part of this. Finally arrived to the castle, and Celaena sent to her quarters. Now she's giving these like beautiful massive rooms because most people aren't supposed to know that she is who she is. So she's supposed to be a lady, I believe. So she's given like a whole new set of rooms and a new wardrobe and some servants as well. The first thing that she does when she's left alone in the room is to search around for anything that she could use as a weapon. So I believe she makes like a makeshift shiv out of like a broken hairpin and some needles or something. Meanwhile, Dorian's meeting with his father, the King of Adarlan. They're said to not look too similar, and there's definitely some tension there, some daddy issues that we're picking up on. The real reason that Dorian went to find Celaena and use her as a champion was because he knew it would piss off his dad. And the king kind of warns him about Celaena, told him to be careful about her, and then I think he like ends up just like hitting him, like abuse. Yeah. So the king is obviously not happy about the fact that Celaena is there, and he warns him about her, but not in like a loving way, and kind of like a dickish way. That makes sense. Anyways, very bumpy relationship here. Celaena, bored out of her mind, is being chaperoned around the castle grounds by Chaol. She's kind of like searching around for possible escape routes, and just kind of wants to get a better lay of the land. They're in the gardens when they come across this ugly like obsidian clock tower. It kind of gives her terrible vibes. It was said to, and it also has these weird word marks kind of etched around it, which I guess are kind of like pentagrams, maybe? I don't know, like these symbols around it. She asked Chaol about it. He doesn't know anything about the symbols. He says that the king actually commissioned to have the clock tower done when Dorian was born. But yes, terrible vibes. Eventually they make their way to the royal library, and we are introduced to one of Celaena's artsy hobbies. Farah has painting, Nesta has dancing, Celaena has reading. She loves reading. She's so excited to go through the library, but Chaol stops her immediately, and he says that because it is a royal library, she needs expressed permission from the royal family or to be a nobility in order to read any of the books. So she's like, okay, fine. And that night she decides to write a letter to Prince Dorian, asking him for his permission to use a library. Dorian writes back pretty quickly, immediately saying yes. However, he demands that she reads 7 books that he's read before so that they can discuss it first. So essentially, they start their own little book club, and I love it. It's so cute. The next day, the competition is supposed to begin, but when she wakes up, Chaol is nowhere to be seen. No one's really come for her. She doesn't really know what's going on. So she just has to hang out around her rooms, which she's obviously like trapped in because she has guards everywhere and she can't leave. But she's hanging out on her balcony when she hears a noble lady downstairs. She's this gorgeous, gorgeous girl. She's been followed by her handmaidens, and you can clearly tell that she is trying to catch the eye of Dorian. It's implied that she's kind of like enmeshed with Duke Parrington, but yeah, she seems pretty transparent as a social climber. She also brings up Celaena, calling her the prince's harlot. She doesn't really know too much about her, but she knows that there was like this big entrance when she came in, and she knows that Dorian went across all of Aurelia to find her, essentially. Celaena, clearly not pleased with being considered to be Dorian's harlot, decides to unceremoniously knock over a pot that almost crushes her. And in response, Celaena asks for her most extravagant and beautiful gown, and she decides to get all balled up. She's getting the finishing touches on her whole like outfit done when Chaol comes rushing in, telling her that we're late, and he drags her upstairs to the glass portion of the castle. Celaena does not love the glass portion of the castle. It makes her pretty uneasy, and after demanding to know where she's being dragged to, Chaol tells her that she is to meet the king in this giant, frilly, extravagant dress. As soon as she hears that she is supposed to meet the king, she's instantly nauseous and pale. She does not have a good track record with the king. She is terrified of him, and the last time that she saw him was at her trial before she was sent to Endovier. And Chaol kind of picks up on her anxiety, and he tells her that the king is a man to be respected and feared, but he's still a man. So she kind of tries to chill her out, and then he tells her that she looks pretty. They go into the room, she bows to the king, and then she silently stands by Dorian. This is also the first time that she's seeing the other 32 contestants under maybe not ideal circumstances, but she manages to look out for the competition. There are 23 other men that she will be competing with. They're a collection of mercenaries, murderers, thieves, and assassins. Because where else do you find loyalty? I don't know. Celaena instantly regrets the frilly dress, but her arrogance is still intact, and she isn't too fazed by these competitors. The competition is to last about 13 weeks. The eliminations go on until there's about 4 people left, and once they narrow it down to the final 4, they will then kind of duke it out in some duels to see who will win at the end. And that person will then become the king's champion. Everyone else will be sent home, or in her case, back to Endovier. Once they leave, Dorian and Chaol finally fill her in on what her new position is supposed to be, her new identity is supposed to be. So she is supposed to be known as Lillian Gordania, and she is said to be a noble lady with a penchant for jewel thieving. Yes. She's a wealthy heiress by day and a jewel thief by night. And the story is that Dorian was allegedly to have captured her as she was trying to steal him of some royal jewels, and that's how he met her. Eventually, her father is said to have sent her away to some town near Endovier, and that's why Dorian went across the country in order to find her. Okay, I'm a little biased. I'm a little partial here, I'm not gonna lie. I love a good Prince Charming, but Celaena and Dorian's back and forth and banter is so cute. I love it. They're traveling back through the castle together with Chaol, obviously, when they run into Lady Kaltane, which is the gorgeous, gorgeous noble lady who's a transparent social climber from before. Celaena can tell right away that Dorian and Chaol kind of don't love her. They don't vibe, let's say. Dorian introduces Celaena as Lady Lillian, and they kind of have some back and forth, and Dorian and Celaena are kind of messing with Kaltane, and Chaol is just kind of like oblivious and like there. And then Dorian kisses Celaena's hand before leaving. Eventually the competition date arrives, and Chaol wakes Celaena up at dawn in order to get her ready to go training. So they're all the champions are training together. They're training in the barracks, and they all kind of have their own trainers. So Chaol is the one who's going to be training Celaena. But Celaena's body is still suffering from Endovier. She's still not at 100%. Like, she can hold her own for the most part, but at the end of the day, Chaol is kind of like beating her in spars and stuff like that. So she's slowly has to like gain her strength back. She kind of gets a chance to scope out the competition, and the biggest threat that she sees is Kane. So Kane, I believe, is an ex-soldier. He's this like hulking brute of a man, and Celaena figures, okay, well, like if he's that large, then normally he's not as fast. But she quickly finds out that he's actually very fast as well. The first kind of test, well, no, not a test, but they start off with a jog, with like a run, I guess, around the castle grounds, and whoever doesn't make it is automatically eliminated. And Kane ends up being at the top of the pack. He ends up being like the first one to finish. Celaena ends up in the middle, which isn't ideal for her. She's very competitive and she's very sure of herself. So middle of the pack isn't great. She's also throwing up a lot after the runs because her body is still recovering, obviously. After the run, Celaena's pretty upset that she's not at the top. She hates the fact that she has to pretend to be this nothing jewel thief when she's literally been known to be Adarlan's assassin, like super notorious. But Chaol warns her that it's best if she like flies under the radar. Like, hello, element of surprise. But anyways, after training, Chaol decides to join her for lunch, and we get to see Chaol start like kind of loosen up a little. Not right away, obviously, but like over time, they do start spending more time together, and they kind of get to know each other a little bit more. They train every morning. Celaena's starting to get up before dawn, which is when Chaol comes to pick her up, and she's starting to try to get her own training as well because she realizes that she has to like build up to the level of where she was before. One day they are walking through the castle when they run into Lady Celaena again. However, she is with a new character. Now she is kind of showing around Princess Nehemia Yitger of Eyllwe. Yeah, Sarah, you are absolutely killing me. But Princess Nehemia is said to be this gorgeous, gorgeous girl. She's the Princess of Eyllwe, which, if you go back to our map, is located right around here, in the southern area of Aurelia. It's one of the few countries that haven't been conquered yet so far, but it's looking a little dicey. Anyway, so the Princess of Eyllwe has been sent to Rifthold in order to kind of like learn the Adarlan ways and to learn the common tongue. And Celaena is serving as her kind of like escort and guide through the whole court system. Celaena recognizes Nehemia because when she was in Endovier, there were a ton of Eyllwe slaves that were captured and she was working with, and they all had a very high respect for her, and there were some rumors that she might have been involved in like rebellious things. So Celaena decides to speak to Nehemia. She speaks to her in Eyllwe, which she did manage to pick up when she was in Endovier. And she quickly realizes that Nehemia is not having a good time with Celaena. She's very disdainful of her. Celaena's also just a bitch, if we're being honest. But yeah, Celaena and Nehemia are having a pleasant conversation, and it's kind of funny because Chaol's kind of just like subtly trying to like come in between Nehemia and Celaena as they're talking, because obviously Nehemia's a princess and Celaena's an assassin. But Nehemia manages to get Celaena to dismiss Celaena, and she asks Celaena to keep her company while she's at the castle. Chaol says absolutely not, which, okay, fine, makes sense. Celaena and Chaol keep trading together. They kind of get to know each other's past. They kind of get to know each other's like histories a bit more. They start like warming up a little bit. But one day, Chaol doesn't show up for training. So it turns out that one of the competitors was found dead that morning, literally ripped to shreds, missing organs, and left in ribbons. Chaol, being the captain of the guard, is then sent to kind of investigate the whole thing. So Celaena goes to training by herself, and while she's there, she does manage to befriend one of the thieves. His name is Nox, and he is the only one from Terrasen. But yeah, he's the only one who's giving her good vibes. Become almost allies, if you will. Eventually, the first test arrives. It turns out to be an archery competition, which, I mean, a little anticlimactic, but once again, Celaena's strategy is to kind of remain in the middle of the pack, do a little underdog thing. So Cain goes earlier, and he does very, very well. It's actually kind of upsetting how well he does. So when it's Celaena's turn, she purposely misses the first 2 shots, but when she hears, like, snickering and, like, little comments, she kind of can't help herself. So she pulls a little Katniss Everdeen, and she hits the last, furthest, most difficult target exactly in the bullseye, which no one else was able to do. And there's, like, instant silence.
Thank you for your consideration.
So yes, she does survive the first test. We have more training going on, but one day all the competitors are gathered, and one of the soldiers decides to try to make a break for it. And he is promptly impaled in the neck by an arrow. Celaena's kind of forced to remember about the time that she spent in Endovier and that time that she decided to break. And it was true, she didn't intend to escape. Just like the soldier's escape wasn't meant for freedom, it was meant to prove a point. He would rather die than play their games. At the end of the day, dying is the only option that they had left. Meanwhile, Dorian is at court with his mother, Queen Georgina, and she has handed him the proverbial list. The list of all of the eligible women that he should be considering marrying, because he is all of 19 years of age and they need to secure an heir. Dorian feels like he's being suffocated at court. He is bored with everything. He's feeling very lonely and like he doesn't belong. And in an effort to escape, he decides to leave, and he stumbles upon Celaena, and she is sparring with Nehemia. He immediately tries to intervene because, once again, assassin, princess, not an ideal combo. Celaena manages to get Dorian to spar with Nehemia since she's not allowed to. And she's quite surprised to find that she wants to kiss him. Which is quite emotionally conflicting considering the fact that he is a Cavaliard and basically her sworn enemy. But eventually Chaol, shows up, and he's immediately no. This is not a situation that can be happening here. So they get into a bit of a fight, and then he orders Celaena to go back to her rooms. And Celaena storms off thinking of all the ways that she can cause him physical harm because, violent assassin. Chaol then tells Dorian that he should stay absolutely clear of Celaena. She is dangerous and she cannot be trusted. And what is the first thing that Dorian does? He goes to see Celaena. She is in her room. She is sitting at the pianoforte and she's kind of lost in her own world. She hasn't really played the pianoforte in a very long time. And as she starts playing, she's pouring her soul out. And then she is thinking about Arabin, her former assassin's master, and Sam, her former lover. Dorian kind of sneaks up on her because she's so in her own world, kind of. He teases her about having a secret lover. And Celaena does not take this well. She orders him to leave her rooms. And Celaena dismisses him and tells him to leave. But before he does, she does tell him a bit about Sam. She says that Sam was her former lover and that he is dead. So Dorian obviously feels pretty awful. I mean, if there's any situation where you have a foot in your mouth, this is essentially this is it. But training continues, and eventually more and more competitors are kind of dropping like flies as they find another champion, once again ripped to shreds. A couple days later, both physically and in the book, it is now time for Samhain, which is essentially a Day of the Dead Halloween-esque celebration. Chaol, has decided to cancel practice and training, and he comes to Celaena in the morning and he asks if she wishes to worship at the temple. Apparently, Samhain is a day where the separation between the dead and the living is the thinnest. So basically, it's like she just told Dia of the Dead. So Dia de los Muertos. So Celaena says that she would rather worship in her own way, so she's not going to the temple. They do usually have a feast at Samhain, so she's like, oh, I am so down to eat, though. But, of course, Chaol says, absolutely not. You're an assassin, and you can't be trusted around people. So Celaena kind of takes a day off. Oh, and Chaol also agrees to bring her back a little trinket from the feast because he feels bad that she's so pouty and miserable about missing the ball. Because she loves, like, balls, and she loves, like, just, like, dressing up and doing, like, girly stuff and dancing. She's a girl's girl. She's a girly girl. But yeah, after the service, Celaena and Nehemia are walking around with Chaol, and they run into Dorian. Dorian was actually at a recent meeting with, like, the councilman and stuff, and he knows that Duke Parrington was planning on using Princess Nehemia. He wants Nehemia to be held as a hostage, so that's why they're keeping her there. Dorian was very much against this, but he felt like he couldn't say anything. Like, he has no right to say anything, and he doesn't want to piss his father off again. But yeah, he kind of knows this is happening, and he feels guilty, and he wants to say something to Nehemia, but he feels like he can't. So Celaena and Nehemia are just hanging out around the grounds again, going through the gardens when they pass the clock tower, and they find Cain being like a little creep and just digging around in the dirt. And he's like digging out all these word marks, which I find super weird to just be doing in the middle of the day, but you know what? Yeah, sure. Celaena's still super curious about the word marks. She's like, what are these? Like, she still doesn't know what they mean, and it's kind of suspicious that Cain was kind of like cleaning some out and like uncovering some. So she asks Nehemia about it, and Nehemia tells her that they are a part of an ancient religion slash magic system, I guess. Yeah, so the word marks were a part of like an old dead religion, so far as she knows. And then she kind of gives Celaena a weird look, and she like looks at her forehead, and she's like, are you sure you don't know anything about word marks? Like, it's kind of weird that she doesn't know, I guess. And then she kind of like accuses Celaena of hiding something, not in like an accusatory tone, but it's just kind of like, there's something that you're not telling me. And Celaena gets super weird and antsy, and then she just kind of changes subjects. But yeah, they're still hanging out a lot more. Nehemia really wants Celaena to start tutoring her instead of like Haltane or the tutors or something like that, because once again, the whole reason that she's at the castle is to like learn the Adarlan ways and learn the common tongue. So Chaol automatically says absolutely not, but Celaena lets her know that there's a time where Chaol's usually not with her, so they decide to do like little Kumon type lessons so that Nehemia can learn the common tongue. But yeah, they become pretty tight, and this is a pretty big deal considering Celaena's track record with friendships. It's not exactly been a good one so far. That night, Celaena's tossing and turning, and she's still kind of pouting about missing the whole feast, when she notices something strange with the dimensions of the room, and she notices like a little bit of a breeze behind one of the tapestries behind her doors. And so she eventually finds a secret tunnel.
Secret tunnel, secret tunnel, through the mountains, secret tunnel, yeah.
So she decides to snoop around a little bit around the little pathways. She does find an escape route, which is huge. So it seems to be an old, forgotten escape route for the king, maybe. But she can tell that no one's been there for a very, very long time. And for a minute, she does consider just running away. But then she thinks about the relationships she's formed so far. She thinks about Dorian and Chaol and Nehemia, and she also doesn't love the idea of always being on the run, and she's finally being given this opportunity to get her freedom. So she decides to hold off for now. She'll keep it in the back of her mind, but right now it's not a priority. So she decides to keep snooping around. She passes by this one pathway that's like super creepy. It has like an ominous breeze, and then there's like this weird whispering coming from it. So she decides to say hell no, and she goes through the left corridor instead. There she finds like a little peeping Tom hole where she can see the whole Yuletide ball, and she notices that almost all of the other competitors are there. which rude. But yeah, everyone else is at the feast and the ball. She spots Dorian and she spots Chaol. She doesn't spot Cain. Cain's the only one that she doesn't notice is there. But she sees Chaol, and then she sees that he's like leaving the ball. So she freaks out because she remembers that earlier he promised that he would bring her something after the ball. So she like zooms up to her room, and then she closes a secret tunnel, and then she like falls asleep. Cut to Dorian just kind of like standing outside of Celaena's room and watching her sleep. In a cute way. He's kind of like, he seems to be very comfortable around her, and he kind of like, he does not see this girl as like dangerous at all. He has like no self-preservation, I guess. But he's like, she's just a pretty girl. Like, what? She's probably fine. And then along comes Chaol. And then he's just kind of like, what are you doing here? And then Dorian's like, what are you doing here? And it's like a whole scene from Spider-Man. And it's like 2 a.m. in this deadly assassin's room. And eventually Chaol does like chase Dorian up and tell him like he cannot be here. He's becoming very protective of Celaena. But he's also like, what am I doing here? Like, and I have no right to be talking to Dorian this way. He's literally the crown prince. He wakes Celaena up, and then he gives her what he promised he was going to give her. So apparently they were giving out little rings to all the noble ladies at the party, and he grabbed one and he went to give it to her. She loved it, she put it on, and then she just fell back to sleep again. And then Chaol tucked her into bed. This is going to be a very long video. But yeah, cute. So that night, Celaena has a dream that she's in the passages again. But the ominous, creepy looking path now is like really warm and inviting, and it smells like roses. So she decides to follow it down until she reaches this door with a knocker on it. And then she goes inside and she finds that there's 2 sarcophagi, and she's in a tomb. The whole place is kind of covered in word marks, and there's this one shaft of moonlight that's lighting up this woman's face. But Celaena can instantly tell that she's in a sacred place. The floor is covered in like starlights, like in stars and constellations, and then the ceiling has like earth, and there's these upside down trees. It's kind of like the whole room is upside down. And when Celaena looks at the woman's sarcophagus's face, she notices something kind of like familiar and something calming about the woman's face, and that's when she notices that she's Fae. And they both have crowns on them, so that's when she realizes that this is Celaena, the first princess of Terrasen, and Gavin, the first king of Adarlan. So these are some people who had died about 1,000 years ago or something, like a very, very long time ago, but they were like very important people. So she was surprised that their grave was like kind of so forgotten and left alone. There's like a whole bunch of jewels and treasure kind of in like the corner of the cave, and then there's also this really apparently like infamous magical sword that Gavin had that was allegedly potentially capable of scorching apart the continent, something like that, but like a very big deal. I guess there's a sword. She feels like she shouldn't have entered into such a sacred place, considering how tainted she feels by her past crimes and all the blood that she has on her hands. She takes like a closer look at the sword. She says its name aloud, which is Damaris, and then there's a voice behind her that goes, you know your history. And that would have scared the bejesus out of me, but standing right behind her is the Celaena Havillard, first princess of Terrasen, who should have been dead 1,000 years ago. So she says that she's not a ghost, but she's also not living. She says that she's been sent there and they don't have much time. They only have such limited time while the 8 guardians are distracted. And Celaena, goes, oh, like the 8 guardians around the clock tower, the gargoyles. I think I might have forgotten to mention this, but there's 8 gargoyles around the creepy clock tower. And then Celaena tells her that they guard the portals between the worlds. And then she says, nothing is a coincidence. Everything has a purpose. You were meant to come to this castle, just as you were meant to be an assassin, to learn the skills necessary for survival. Celaena then says that there's evil lurking in the castle, and it's kind of like spreading throughout the world. And Celaena has to stop the evil before it's too late, and there's a rift between the worlds. It's too great. No pressure or anything. Just And on top of that, she also must win the competition to become the champion for Aurelia. So, just like, oh, and that too. And then there's this howling in the tunnels, and Elena says that they have no more time. She says that somebody sent both of them there because they wanted Celaena to see and to learn what was happening, but it wasn't her. And she just tells her to run. There's this screeching noise, and before she leaves, she also gives her presses something into her hand. She's saying she says this will protect you. And then Celaena runs to her room. She hears some snarling and some screeching before she runs back, and then everything fades to black. And then Celaena wakes up, the eye of Elena in her palm, and the secret tunnel door slightly ajar. She runs to close it, and she hides the amulet under her dress, and she smells the smell of roses wafting into her room from the tunnels. She's not exactly thrilled about her new little side quest that she's been given. She's got enough going on right now, but then she thinks about Nehemia and Dorian and Chaol, and she's like, okay, just to keep them safe, I will investigate for some clues tomorrow. But yeah, then she passes out again. The next morning, Chaol comes running into her room, and he demands to know where she was last night. She tells him that he was there last night, so he should know that she was there. But it turns out that there is yet another competitor who has been torn to shreds and turned into ribbons. And she immediately remembers the screaming that she heard the night before. As a result of training being canceled, she decides to go to the library again. And on her way there, she smells a really, really thick scent of blood, and she walks past the body of the dead competitor. This is the first time she's seeing one of their bodies, and it's not a good time. All of his organs have been taken out, including his brain. There's blood everywhere, and on the wall written behind him are word marks written in his blood. And yeah, it's not a fun time. At lessons later, because remember the Kumon lessons, Celaena brings up the murder to Nehemia because she has a couple more questions about the word marks, when along comes Cain. He seems to he's always consistently putting on more and more muscle. This guy's jacked. He's huge. And he's just being a little dick. He starts taunting Celaena, calling her a fake lady, and then he kind of goes up to her and he whispers in her ear, and he's like, I know that you were at Endovier, and I know that it must kill you having to miss every little arrow, because I know that you're Celaena Sardathian. He's itching for a fight. He's trying to get a rise out of her. But Nehemia comes in, and she kind of convinces them to leave and be peaceful. Now, Celaena's become obsessed with trying to figure out what these word marks means. So she's at the library later with Chaol, just trying to find anything that she can. But with the disappearance and / prohibition of magic a couple years ago, there's very limited information about anything remotely magic. So far, she's heard that, from what she's found, it's said that word marks, they hold Aurelia together and have the power to create portals to other worlds. There's even this one theory where the mother goddess was a spirit from another world and found Aurelia in need of form and life. But these are all highly speculative and crazy theories, so she doesn't really have a lot to go off of. She pulls one of the books out from the pile that she took out earlier, and she notices that this is an older book, and it's not one that she remembers pulling out, but it's called The Walking Dead, and it's a book about monsters, and it's giving creepy vibes. So, and then she starts hearing these weird animalistic guttural noises coming from the depths of the library, maybe. Chaol's with her and doesn't hear anything, but still, she gets really creepy vibes, and she just decides to leave that one, put that one back. And then later, Dorian comes to visit her in her room, and they have this cute little moment where he teaches her how to play pool, and then they're just playing pool and talking and chatting until 2 a.m, just like cuties. So they're bonding a little. And then the next morning she has another test. This one's a sparring test, and she's up against Varen, who is Kane's kind of little lackey. And she's sick of the whole middle of the pack thing, and she knows that Kane knows now, so she doesn't really see a point in hiding things anymore. So she decides to just beat the crap out of Varen. Kane still comes out on top, though. He's still at the top of the pack. Chaol's also at a dinner with Duke Parrington. He notices something kind of strange. Duke Parrington always has this black obsidian ring around his finger, and it's weird, but Kay notices that when he looks at his ring, his eyes kind of go black, but then when he looks away, they kind of go normal. So training goes by, more murders happen, more tests happen, and then one night, Elena appears in Celaena's room again, just like a sleep paralysis demon, and she reminds her that she has to win the competition, and she also tells her to look to the right, and she'll find the answers there. Celaena has no idea what that means, but I'll take it. Anyways, the next day is another test. This one's a poisons test, and Celaena's stuck between these two poisons. She decides to look to her right, and there is Pallor. So he is another competitor. She remembers from earlier on him saying that poisons were his specialty, so she checks, and then she just kind of copies him, and she ends up winning. Well, she ends up passing, because cheaters always prosper. Nehemia and Celaena are hanging out again. They're at the kennels where there's a whole new litter of puppies. When along comes Dorian, Celaena sees this one antisocial little pup, and Dorian tells her that if he doesn't start reacting well to humans, they're gonna have to put him down, and she immediately objects to this. And he promises that nothing will happen to them, and they have like a cute little moment, and Nehemia sees it. So then afterwards, she like asks Celaena about it, but then Celaena immediately goes, "I would rather carve out my heart than be with the Haviliard." It's giving star-crossed lovers. It's giving Romeo and Juliet. Enemies to lovers. Not really. Celaena's making her way back to her rooms when she runs into Kane. And he's kind of like holding his neck or chest. He's like out of breath. He also has like an obsidian black ring around his finger, and his eyes are like black, and he like kind of looks freaked out, and then he runs another way, and then as soon as he leaves, Celaena just runs straight to her room because she's like, what is going on here? I do not want to be next. So she goes back to her rooms, and then she writes notes to Nox and Pallor, who are like her little allies, and she tells them not to leave the rooms that night. And then the next morning, another contestant has expired. Meanwhile, I haven't talked too much about Kaltain. So Kaltain is meeting with Parrington. So Kaltain, which is a noble lady from earlier that was really, really into Dorian, she was brought to the palace by Duke Parrington. I think it's kind of like a courting thing where he's kind of like courting her, but it's also kind of weird because he knows that she wants Dorian, and he kind of like helps a little, like strategizes a little. It's a bit of a weird dynamic, but Kaltain's been suffering from some really bad headaches, and as a result, she's been smoking a lot of poppies to kind of deal with the headaches. So she's just been not having a great time, but she's still like obsessed with Dorian. And then she's been bringing up the fact that Dorian was hanging out with this Lady Lillian because she wanted to grab some more intel on that. At first, Duke Parrington's really surprised to hear that they're like hanging out together, but then on a second meeting, he kind of says, oh, well, like, you know, he kind of implies that Lady Lillian may be getting in between Kaltain and Dorian. He also implies that maybe Lady Lillian isn't of the best upbringing. So Kaltain, in her drug-induced state, kind of starts thinking that maybe Lady Lillian is off to try to entrap Dorian, and that she has to rescue him. She has to save him from her. They're just like having these little like side plot kind of conversations. That night, Nehemia comes running into Celaena's room, distraught. She's just found out that 500 Eyllwe rebels were massacred by King Adarlan's men, and she is devastated. And Celaena is there to comfort her friend through this really difficult moment. And then after that, Nehemia kind of like locks herself away for a bit. She just kind of keeps to her rooms. Meanwhile, Celaena is having the worst cramps of life. After a year in the salt mines, her period just like stopped because her body couldn't keep up with it. So now it's back, and it is back with the vengeance. She is really going through it. Chaol comes to visit her one day, and she tells him that she's indisposed, but But he kind of goes on and he wants to discuss the whole rebel situation with her and offer his sympathies after the massacre, which is kind of like out of character for him because he's always been so blindly faithful and loyal to the king so far. So he's growing a little, but Celaena's not having a good time. So she keeps telling him to leave. He does it. She eventually just throws up and tells him that she's on her period, and then he just kind of awkwardly pieces out. He gets like all flustered and he just leaves. And then along comes Dorian. He apologizes for his father, kind of like for who he is. He also calls her Celaena beautiful, and then he gives her like a little kiss on the cheek. Have I mentioned that I love Dorian? I don't know. I honestly love him. I don't know if it's my lust for power talking, but like he's literally Prince Charming. But yeah, sorry. Anyways, Yulemas is approaching. If you play Sims 4, then you know this is Christmas. But now there's 6 competitors left, and the last trial is supposed to happen right after Yulemas, I think. But yeah, they're still dropping like flies. Like there's been a lot of murders going on. So they're down to 6. Dorian and Celaena are still getting closer and closer. They're going on walks together, and then Chaol's kind of just like watching afar, a little bit concerned, but also a little bit jealous maybe. And then Dorian also notices that Celaena's always wearing the ring that Chaol gave her, so he's like giving a little jealous vibes too. And then he also notices the Eye of Elena, which is the emerald she's always wearing, and he figures it must be like replica of the original amulet, and he tells her the story behind it. Apparently it was a very powerful magical amulet, and I won't go into too much detail, but yeah, it belonged to Elena, and then it went missing like 1,000 years ago. And then one night, Celaena's in her bed reading when she drops her book. And then when she goes to pick it up, she finds a whole bunch of word marks written in chalk under her bed. And she freaks out. She immediately thinks, I'm next. It's coming. So naturally, she runs to the library in the middle of the night, only to find Nehemia reading a giant old tome that's written entirely in the common tongue. Now remember, they're Kumon pals. Nehemia shouldn't know how to read. Celaena goes, I thought you weren't reading at this level yet. And Nehemia, at first she's a little antsy, but then Nehemia says in perfect, accentless common tongue. I don't know what their language they speak is, but in the common tongue, she says, if you believe that, Lillian, then you're just as big a fool as everyone else. I'm paraphrasing, I think that's it. And then she storms off, leaving behind a fluttering piece of paper. What is on this fluttering piece of paper? A single word mark. So naturally, Celaena believes that Nehemia is the evil in the castle and she is coming after the champions and that she is next. Yulemas has arrived and Dorian has given our dear Celaena about 3 pounds of candy and a puppy. This isn't what the puppy's supposed to look like, but I'm just going to include a picture of my puppy because I want you guys to see how cute he is. With Yulemas, Celaena is now paranoid that Nehemia may possibly release the beast at the Yulemas ball that night. So what is her only option? To infiltrate the ball and make sure that she can protect both Dorian, and Chaol. I mean, logically, it's the only thing she can do for their safety. That morning, there's a Yulemas service going on, and Celaena's sitting with Chaol when they both accidentally fall asleep because it's like this really long ceremony. They wake up before there's this procession where these like blindfolded children go around like the chapel area, and then they give gifts and blessings from one of the goddesses, from like the gods and goddesses to patrons. And then Celaena's chosen by a child who gives her the blessings of the goddess Diana of the hunt, as well as a solid gold arrow. Celaena goes to give it to Chaol, expecting him to immediately take it away, but he says, who am I to anger the gods? So she keeps it. The night of the ball comes, and Celaena is looking radiant as would be expected. She's been filling up a lot in the last couple of weeks. She's been like bulking. She's looking good. She kind of just like walks into the ball. Like she has her guards that are following her at all times, but they just assumed that Dorian invited her, and she fully just walks in and has her little Cinderella story moment at the top of the stairs where everyone stops and stares because she's just so beautiful and gorgeous. I think I heard that Acotar was supposed to be a Beauty and the Beast retelling, And Throne of Glass was originally supposed to be like a Cinderella retelling. So if anything, this is her Cinderella moment. Okay, that's probably the only thing I see in common with Cinderella. But Chaol manages to beat Dorian to the bottom of the stairs, and he's waiting there for Celaena with like a smile plastered to his face, knowing that he's seething because she totally broke into this ball. But Celaena manages to convince him to let her stay. They've grown close over the last couple of weeks, and she's kind of been she's gaining his trust a little. But she is allowed to stay, and she keeps an eye on Nehemia for the rest of the night, who is sitting next to the queen, Dorian's mom. Eventually, Nehemia does come up to her, and it's frigid up in there. It's like Siberia. She tells her that she's not feeling well and she's ready to retire, and she leaves the ball. Celaena does feel pretty bad about accusing her, like, one friend of terrorizing a castle and murdering and destroying the bodies of a whole bunch of people. But yeah, eventually Dorian comes and he asks Celaena for a dance. It's like he kind of admits to himself that he wants to kiss her, but obviously she's an assassin. So they start dancing and waltzing across the ballroom, and Chaol's just kind of standing there watching them when another nobleman comes up and asks about Lady Lillian, about who she is. And he mentions that Dorian looks like he's in love with her. But Chaol can kind of see it, but he doesn't think that Celaena loves Dorian back. Nevertheless, he decides to leave the ball and let Celaena and Dorian have their little night. Celaena is also at the ball, and she happens to see Lady Lillian and Dorian dancing, and she is seething. And she decides that Lady Lillian must be eliminated. Celaena and Dorian end up dancing until about 3 a.m, non-stop, until eventually Celaena kind of sneaks away and she goes back to her room. Who's there waiting for her but Dorian? He beat her there, saying that she didn't give him a chance to say goodbye. And he leans up against her door, and then he kisses her. And then she kisses him back. And then they're making out before Celaena remembers that he is a Habiliard and that his father literally sent her, a 17-year-old girl, to a death camp. So she kind of puts an end to it, and she wishes him a good night. Now Dorian is left smitten. He's just jumped off a cliff, and he is committed to making this thing work. Let's recall that he is a 19-year-old princeling who has probably never faced a lot of difficulties in his life. So let's give him some grace, okay? Celaena's back in her rooms, and she's just kind of like dancing in the balcony, on her balcony, all rosy-faced and smiley. And who's there lurking from the bottom of the gardens? Chaol. He's kind of like staring up at her on the balcony. He's waiting for her to notice him, but she doesn't, and he's sad, I assume. Dorian comes to visit her the next morning. They're playing with little Fleetfoot when he kind of politely apologizes for the night before. He's still obviously crazy about her, but he can kind of sense that she's a little awkward about it, and she is really kind of awkward about it. So they just kind of leave things kind of cordial, in a way, kind of unresolved. Meanwhile, Celaena is with Parrington again, and she, of course, has her really bad headaches, and she's still under the influence of all of the poppies, when Parrington decides to tell Celaena out of the goodness of his heart about Lady Lillian's true identity, because he believes that Celaena has the best intentions for Dorian, and that she will look out for him. He tells her about the whole competition, and he basically convinces Celaena to slip something into Celaena's drink if it comes to the final duel. So what's happening is that there's supposed to be a toast before the final duel, where the two victors drink from a cup of wine, and her job is to slip a little something into Celaena's. He convinces Keltane that this is a heroic act and that the king's in cahoots with this because they want to make sure that Dorian is protected. And he kind of stresses that the king is depending on her for this. Now, Celaena's back in her room, slipping through books again about word marks, when she finds a book about the Riderak. In this book, it says, for sacrifices to the Riderak, using the victim's blood, mark the area around it accordingly. Once the creature has been summoned, these marks guide the exchange. For the flesh of the sacrifice, the beast will grant you the victim's strength. And Celaena is almost certain that this is her monster. So apparently the word marks kind of work outside of the realm of magic, and that's why they are still working like this day. And she's still convinced that Nehemia is the one who's opening these portals and letting these monsters through. So she decides to finally take matters into her own hands and go hunting for the Riderak and Nehemia through the secret tunnels. She's in the tunnels when she hears these ominous whispering noises coming from one of the halls, and this green glowing light coming from this old room. And who's in this room? Not Nehemia, but Cain. Dun, dun, dun. Who would have thought? So Cain's in the process of summoning this like ugly, terrifying creature when they both spot her, and like this gust of wind just kind of brings her forth towards them, and he goes, well, it wasn't supposed to be you tonight, but who am I to like a gift horse in the mouth? I think that's a saying. A gift horse in the mouth. So then he decides to lock her in the room with the Riderak, and he hightails it out of there. So yeah, a lot of this checks out because as the competition was progressing, Celaena was noting repeatedly how much bigger and bigger Cain was getting. He was basically on magical steroids this whole time, sacrificing the other competitors so he could gain their strength. But anyways, and back to the present, Celaena's locked in the room with this Riderak. She decides to do like a whole bullfighting thing where she like holds her cape in front of the door, and then she jumps right when the beast is coming straight towards her, and then he goes straight through the door and he like shatters it. So she manages to run out of the room, but she doesn't have time to go back to her room. So she immediately turns to the left and she runs straight towards Elena's grave, which makes her recall Elena's warning that the answers were to the right. So it turns out that the room where Cain was summoning these demons was to the right of the grave. So she had the answer the whole time. Anyway, she's running for her life through these tunnels until she just makes it to the grave when she spots Damaris, and she just grabs it right as the Riderak leaps onto her, and she manages to stick the knife straight through its head and in through its skull. The Riderak immediately kind of explodes into this giant heap of blood, like rotting blood and like rotting black blood. And she manages to plummet the sword into its head through its mouth, but it still bites her arm. So she manages to like run back up to her room, but her arm is in a severe amount of pain. It's weird because it's like hot and cold at the same time, and she just makes it into her room before collapsing. She kind of goes in and out of consciousness, and then she sees Nehemia burst through her door and find her on the ground. She immediately grabs her and throws her into the bath, and as soon as the water touches her arm, Celaena starts screaming from the pain because it's like unbearable. It's most likely poisoned by the Riderak. Nehemia holds her, and then she starts drawing these word marks on her arm. And then Celaena loses consciousness again. She wakes up with newly healed scars all over her arm, and Nehemia has questions. Celaena finally admits that she is Celaena Sardathian, and for Nehemia, all starts clipping together because that's the reason that she could speak Eyllwe and in the intonation that the slaves usually used because she was surrounded by Eyllwe slaves. She also knew that Celaena Sardathian was taken to Endovier, but nobody knew that she was still alive. So it's kind of like, it's connecting all the dots for her. She tells her about the whole king's competition and why she's at the castle, and they make up and they're BFFs again. Nehemia says that Celaena's known by many names, but she decides to give her one more, and that name is Alantia, which means spirit that cannot be unbroken. The next morning, Kane's a little short with Celaena, understandably. He kind of asks that she's sure of what she's getting into when it comes to Dorian, and she just kind of like brushes it off. There's a lot of stuff going on with her right now. Dorian isn't exactly the top priority right now, but she realizes that she can't really tell Chaol about the Kane and the Riderak, because then that would mean her telling him about the secret passageways that are the secret tunnels that are in her room. So she just kind of has to stay quiet. They're walking around when they run into the king, who has come back from his mysterious mission. Celaena's still terrified about him, and she kind of senses this evil aura around him. But Kane's just Chaol. So many C words. But Chaol's kind of stressed because the king returned under really mysterious circumstances. He came back saying that his entire traveling entourage was killed on their way back from the White Fang Mountains, and he literally just showed up to the castle gates by himself, like, hey, what's up? Chaol also has no idea where the king went, which I would say is a little troubling considering he's literally the captain of the guard. I feel like he's supposed to know these things. It's clear that he's untrusted. Celaena is training with Nox when he notices the fresh new scars on her arm. He kind of thinks something's up. And right now there are 5 competitors left. Remember, top 4 go on to the duels. Celaena tells him, this weren't a life or death situation for me, I would leave the castle right now. And that's when Nox realizes that Lady Lillian isn't a jewel thief. He kind of pieces things together, and he realizes that he is dealing with the queen of the underworld, which honestly, badass title. And he decides to leave the competition that night. The day before the duel, Celaena does not want to be alone. There's so much stuff going on right now that she's like, I don't want to be alone. So she invites Dorian to come over, and then they end up smooching until about 3 in the morning. He's falling for her hard. I'm talking like seeing a future with a deadly assassin while you're crown prince hard. Like, he's having serious considerations here. But yeah, Celaena's got a lot going on. I don't think romance is really at the top of her priority right now. The day of the duel comes, and Kaltain is there. She's very, very troubled. She's starting to notice hallucinations almost with her headaches and her illicit use of poppies. So when she meets Kane, she notices that there's these like weird wings kind of circling him. Anyways, she's there with the poison. She sneaks it into the cup. For the duels, Kane is going to be fighting a mercenary, and then Celaena will be fighting someone else who I forgot about, and then the winner of both of their duels, respectively, will face off against each other in the final round. Kane goes first, and he's literally on magical steroids, so he dispatches his competition very quickly. Celaena goes after him, and before she goes to the duel, Chaol offers her his sword, and Nehemia offers her staff. Personally, I'd go with the sword, but hey, power of friendship. Also, there's the whole metaphor thing about beating the Adderlanians with an Eyllwe weapon. So, there's that. Celaena also dispatches her competition really quickly, and then immediately after the king proposes a toast, the king orders the competitors to toast to the god of war or something. And Kaltain's there. She does like a little speech before handing the competitors each their wine. And then the final duel starts like right away. They don't even give this girl a chance to catch her breath. They're just kind of like, okay, let's move on. They're not even trying to hide it at this point, honestly. But Celaena immediately feels that something's wrong. She's starting to feel a little doozy, a little hazy and losing her balance a little. And then she hears Kaltain do a little like snicker. And then she knows there was something in her cup. She immediately realizes that it was that they have given her Bloodbane. Now, Bloodbane was one of the poisons on her test, and she recalls that it can provide disorientation, hallucinations, and in some cases death. A bit of a triple whammy there. While Celaena's trying to process this, she's being thrown around like a rag ball by Chaol. Because remember, magical steroids versus roofied 18-year-olds. It's not exactly an even playing field here. It's not long before the staff that Nehemia gave her turns into a toothpick, and Celaena's not handling herself very well. Kane's also just being an absolute dick. He knows that she's been poisoned too. He's like in on it. He's also starting to taunt her, but he's saying things like, "What would your father think of you?" And he's like, "I can see right through you. It's all right there for me." Then he proceeds to ask her what it was like waking up in between her parents covered in their blood. He's still beating her when the hallucinations start happening. She starts hearing audible noises, and all these voices are calling her, but they're calling her a different name. Kane throws her one last time, and she ends up hitting her head. And when she opens her eyes, she looks up, and there's just like something dead standing over her. So a little fun fact about Bloodbane. Apparently, back in the magical days, it was used by seers to see into other worlds. So Dorian's sitting next to his father. He's just kind of like frozen in place. But Chaol decides to act. He kind of, in what I'm assuming is actually kind of a risky move, he like runs down to the arena and he like lays down right next to where the chalk is, and he talks to Celaena. He like lays next to her and he's like, "Celaena, get up." Her whole world is kind of enveloped in darkness. She soon realizes that she's actually shifting between two worlds. She looks up and she's surrounded by all of these shadows and demons. Then a whole horde of them just come at her and they start attacking her like they would describe in my Sunday school classes to try to traumatize me. They're basically like attacking her and they're trying to drag her to the clock tower. Now keep in mind, this whole duel is happening outside in the gardens near the clock tower. And the clock tower it's not a regular clock tower anymore. It has now become a portal into another world. Another portal, if you will, with all of its obsidianness. So Celaena's just laying there screaming, trying to attack the air, trying to attack all these demons. Meanwhile, Kane's just kind of standing in front of her, like smiling creepily down at her and laughing. And everyone in the audience is kind of watching, going like, what is going on here? Like, they're all very confused. Nehemia decides to run down to the arena and she joins Chaol next to the arena, and she starts making these kind of little like symbols in the air. She pulls off these little incantations, and it's giving very much Severus Snape. Celaena is she's almost entirely broken. She's getting ready to give up when suddenly doors appear everywhere. Doors of all shapes and sizes are opening. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have an endgame situation on our hands. Celaena comes out fighting. She's fighting demons left and right. She's like airbending them essentially with her like wind powers, and she finally makes it through to Celaena, and she puts up like this shield of wind, I think, to protect her. She says that she can't give Celaena her strength, but what she can do is that she can remove the poison from her so that she won't be trapped in between these two worlds. While this is going on, Kane and the king kind of have this like little look going on between them, and then Kane just decides to walk through the barrier, and he sees Celaena too. He says that they were all brought there for a reason, but as he's breaking through Celaena's barrier, the poison is seeped out of Celaena and she's brought back to the real world. So now it's finally back to the 18-year-old versus the magical steroids dude. She immediately squares up, but she is really not doing well. She's not firing on all four cylinders. She has like a whole bunch of dislocations and like cuts and like injuries going on. And suddenly a bright blue light appears on her forehead. The king stands up. Nehemia gasps, and Kane's kind of like taken aback for a second. And Celaena uses this opportunity to grab what's left of her little staff that Elena managed to pass to her, and she stabs Kane in the side. And then, Jedi style, she cuts off one of his arms. She wants to kill him. He knows way too much. But instead, she decides to stop, turn over, and look at the king and wait. He has no choice but to name her champion now. And as soon as he does, Celaena collapses. Dorian's running down to see her when the king and Kane exchange another look, and Kane goes to stab Celaena in the back when Chaol interferes, and then he stabs Kane and he kills him. Keeping in mind, this is Chaol's first ever kill. This is like a very big deal for him. Dorian makes it down and he's holding Celaena. She's basically delirious and she just starts laughing because trauma. And all while Dorian's holding her and kissing her forehead, Celaena decides to kind of lose it. She accuses Duke Parrington of giving her like faulty poison, or like the poison not working. And then she kind of just like admits everything that she did because she's not exactly all there. And the Duke uses this opportunity to turn on her, and he has her arrested for admitting to poisoning Celaena. When Celaena wakes up, Nehemia is there to visit her, and she kind of explains that she's the reason that she's alive right now. It turns out that the word marks were secretly passed down through the royal families of Eyllwe as kind of like a last resort use of magic. So Nehemia knew about the word marks this whole time. She also knew about the other worlds, and she was able to see what Celaena was up against. She knew that something was going on with the portals, and she was like spending all this time at the palace basically trying to get rid of the Rideraks that Kane. They should not have made those two names so similar. But that Kane was summoning, she was trying to get rid of this whole time. And she was also the one that was drawing the word marks under Celaena's bed. It turns out that they were like protection wards to keep her safe, and then Celaena kept erasing them, and it was like a whole back and forth. Nehemia was also the one who let Elena in. So she was the one who like opened the whole portals with her little incantations. She doesn't know what the mark on Celaena's forehead was, but she's also concerned that maybe the king might know about word marks, and that would be a very, very bad thing if he did. And then finally, she returns the Eye of Elena to Celaena. Dorian also comes to see her. He apologizes for not stepping in. Celaena's like, it's okay. And then he kisses her, but it kind of like hurts her jaw to kiss him. Meanwhile, the king and Duke Parrington are having a meeting. So the king doesn't know what the blue mark on Celaena's forehead was, but he is determined to keep an eye on her as a result of it. He doesn't want to risk any loose threads, so to speak. They discuss Celaena, and the Duke Parrington discusses this power that they were experimenting with Celaena in order to kind of control her. He said that she got a little bit messy at the end, but that's something that they'll have to fix in the future. And they also plan on using Celaena in the future if possible. They also have like these matching obsidian rings. I don't know how to fix that in so that it flows, but if we can figure something out, that would be great. A week later, Chaol finally comes to visit Celaena. He's been having a bit of a tough time, obviously, since he is dealing with his first kill. Celaena thanks him for saving her life, and he admits that killing Kane was easy, and he feels that that's the worst part for him. Because remember, he's always been so true to his morals, so this is a very big deal for him. He also mentions the fact that he heard what Kane was saying about Celaena's parents, and he apologizes for what happened to her. She says it was a very long time ago, and she like barely remembers it. But yes, he's obviously gained some sympathy towards her. Celaena can tell that he's taking his first kill pretty rough. So as he turns to go, she kind of stops him, and then she holds him, and then he holds her back, and they're like in this embrace when in comes Dorian. Chaol immediately like pushes away from Celaena because Dorian's his boy, you know. So he just excuses himself and says that he has to go. Dorian tells Celaena the king finally drew up the papers for her contract, and Celaena is quite ecstatic about this. She can't believe that she actually has a chance of gaining her freedom before. She has not really ever been free, I would think. In her mind, she's just thinking about her freedom. So then Dorian's like, oh, looks like we're going to be spending a lot more time together. And then Celaena's like, actually, we need to talk. She's like, I can't be the king's champion and also be with you. She's like, I'm done with like keeping all of these secrets. And it just seems like it's crossing a line here. She also has to be realistic. He's the crown prince of Adarlan and she's an assassin. It was never going to work out anyways. So she decides to friendzone the charming, hot, perfect prince, as one does. She says that she just wants to focus on being free. She's never experienced it before, and to be free, she has to be truly free. So, bye-bye, Dorian. But they can be friends. Chaol eventually goes back to Celaena's rooms to find Dorian to kind of explain the whole, like, hug situation when he finds Celaena by herself. And she tells him that she called the whole thing off. And he's like, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. But in his inside, his heart's fluttering a little. He's like, okay, all right. She can't take it, Prince. That's fine with me. But then they sit down and they drink to Celaena's freedom. Later, Celaena's back in Elena's tomb. Apparently she's gone back there a couple times. It's just Celaena and Elena. Elena says that Celaena has the potential to be great. She has the potential to be even greater than Elena was. And she's exactly where she needs to be, which is beside the king. Celaena thanks her for saving her life once again, and then Elena responds. It's too far. Blood ties can't be broken. And then she disappears into like a mythical. She fades to mythicalness. Later on, Celaena goes to meet the king. She goes to sign her papers. He's not ecstatic about their partnership, but a deal's a deal, so he signs the contract. But he tells her that if she steps out of line, then he's going to kill Chaol. And if she steps out of line again, or if she returns and she doesn't come back, he's going to go after Nehemia. And if she still displeases him, he's going to go after Nehemia's whole family. So Celaena's kind of stuck, but 4 more years, baby. That's all she's got to do until she finally experiences true freedom. Or will she? Only time will tell. As for now, this has concluded the first Throne of Glass novel. Okay. Whew, so that was exhausting. If you made it this far, thank you. So that was Throne of Glass. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little partial. I probably did not give Chaol the time that he deserves, but I have a feeling that he'll make a comeback, so we'll go deeper into that. Yeah, this was the first Throne of Glass book that I read. Honestly, the beginning was a little bit tough for me to get into, but the ending had me hooked, so I'm excited to see where it goes from here. And I'm honestly too exhausted to make any commentary or anything like that, but if you liked it, let me know. I will probably return for the third novella. Full disclosure, I have not read it yet, so it may be a hot minute, but I hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching. Bye!